Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Horse Center with Swiss Army Shawn. And tonight, the voice of, I would say, California racing. Michael Wrona, how are you this evening?
I'm very well. I think that might be a bit of a stretch to go statewide, but thanks for the compliment.
No, I don't think it's a stretch to go statewide. And we were saying before we came on air how when we're at the track and we hear the voice or we're watching on TVG or on Twin Spires or whatever app it is that you bet the races, you don't ever see the face usually that goes along with the voice. So you have this voice coming down from the heavens, and now it's in front of you. It's always a surreal experience for me. How about for you, Shawn?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, times have changed. So with social media, you can put the face to the voice, but you never see them simultaneously all the time. So, yeah, it's definitely a cool experience and different.
Absolutely, for sure. So you got your start in Australia as a very young man. So 17 years old, I think I read, is when you called your first race. So, I mean, that's probably what. I mean, did you grow up telling people, "Hey, I'm going to be a horse race announcer," or is it something you kind of just came into?
Throughout high school, I became absolutely set on the idea for a work experience week. I actually put down race caller as my preferred job allocation, but there were no openings and they couldn't quite fashion such a thing. But I had the hankering to be a race caller since I pretty much started high school, early teens. My grandfather had given me a horse racing board game with plastic horses, play money, roll of the dice, that type of thing. And I can still remember the names of those horses. There were 10 of them. I used to derive the most enjoyment from abandoning the rules and just moving them around the board to the roll of the dice, calling out their names. And I graduated soon after that to drawing the colours, the silks, the owner's silks of horses of that era on little pieces of paper, which I would push across my bedroom floor, creating these phantom or fantasy race calls into a tape recorder. Probably drove the neighbours crazy in the process, but I ended up accumulating more than 1,000 of those little pieces of paper. I'd have them in brown lunch paper bags, designated Melbourne sprinters, Sydney milers, long distance horses from Brisbane, whatever it might have been from around the country. And so I would just create these race programs on my bedroom floor. I was doing that for a couple of years before I ever went to a racetrack to witness a live race. But in Australia, the media coverage is such that you're being hit left, right and centre with horse racing. It's wonderful. You can be driving around in your car listening to a radio station that's dedicated around the clock to broadcasting live races from around the country. So I was really influenced and inspired by some of those race callers I heard painting these word pictures and found it so exciting and enthralling, and I just wanted to mimic them and emulate them.
It's always good to know. A lot of kids, they don't know what they want to do ever. So it seems like those who do, they end up doing what it is they wanted to do. I also find it fascinating about the history of some Australian horse racing tracks. Watching Steven Spielberg's The Pacific, I did not know, but a lot of them were used to actually house American soldiers during World War II when they were out in the Pacific, which was kind of an interesting thing for me as well.
Brisbane's main racetrack, Eagle Farm, shut down. Well, Doomben did as well. The two tracks, they're across the street from each other in Brisbane. And there's quite a bit of history about how they became facilities to aid the war effort. And there were US Army installations and installments at those racetracks.
Yeah, and when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting for sure. So you moved, I found this interesting too, that you went straight from your parents' house to Los Angeles. That must
have been
a
culture shock, mate.
A little. Well, you remember, you know the song from Guns N' Roses, right? Welcome to the Jungle.
Yeah, right.
When he gets off and he says, you know where you are, you're in the jungle, baby, you're going to die. That comes from when he got off the bus from Indiana in Los Angeles. So did you have a similar experience?
Very much so. And had to learn to drive on the opposite side of the road. Everything was new and very big and nerve-wracking. I'd been asked to come to Hollywood Park as a backup to John Tapp, who happened to be my idol. He was the race caller above all in Australia that inspired me, and I just wanted to be like Johnny Tapp in high school when other kids were idolizing athletes or rock stars. And he was offered the job at Hollywood Park in 1990. By this stage, across the late 80s, I'd gained employment at the radio station in my hometown of Brisbane, which was dedicated to racing coverage. I was doing some occasional thoroughbreds. I was doing more greyhound race calling and harness race calling. You pretty much have to do all the different codes of racing coming up through the ranks of race callers in Australia. I was gaining experience in a lot of areas and was pretty happy with my progress. And out of the blue came this phone call when I was 24 that John Tapp was reaching out to me from Sydney, and could I give him a call back? And he told me that Marge Everett, who ran Hollywood Park, wanted to bring him over as a potential long-term replacement for their current announcer. Born of the popularity across the 80s of Trevor Denman at Santa Anita and Delmar. And John was too long in the tooth by his own admission, too well entrenched in Australia. He was Sydney's #1 race caller to make a move of that magnitude. So he said he'd like to bring his family for a little working vacation for a few weeks, and was asked if there's somebody younger with fewer commitments who might accompany him with a view to finishing off the race meet. And he called me. I met my idol a few weeks later at Sydney Airport and was sitting next to him on a jumbo jet bound for California. It was real pinch yourself material, but I befriended John and he helped greatly in the transition. You're talking about the culture shock earlier. It would have been a lot harsher if he were not there. But fortunately, he aided me tremendously in the transition. I would call 1 or 2 races a day when he was there, and then kind of took up the job full time after his departure. But he's been a huge influence, and it became a life and a career-changing moment when I received that phone call from John.
You've had a lot of, I would say, career for horses and jockeys. You've been a part of significant calls with Cigar and Lafitte Pinkai when he took over the Wins title. Tell us a little bit about what were those, like, pinch yourself moments too, but tell us a little bit of, like, you kind of knew that those things were on tap. So did you prepare for them in advance in case they happen, or did it just just come out naturally?
Yeah, well, within about a month or so of being at Hollywood Park, I was thrown into the cauldron of the Grade 1 Hollywood Gold Cup, which featured Sunday Silence, reigning Horse of the Year, and Criminal Type, who would be voted Horse of the Year for 1990. They locked horns at the 3/8 pole and were only a head apart thereafter. So that was a monumental moment, a real baptism for me at the highest level, so early in the game. And then these races of statistical significance that you've referenced cropped up at different tracks over the years, and I just happened to be lucky enough to be in the right booth at the right time. And it's different when in the case of Cigar, for example, which I called at Arlington when he equaled Citation's record in 96, when you know a particular race is coming and it's on the calendar and that's the date, and then you know the makeup of the field, etc., you have a different mindset, more preparatory, I guess. But in the case of Pinkai breaking the record held by Shoemaker, which was at Hollywood Park in 99, and subsequently I was at Bay Meadows when Russell Bayes beat Pinkai's record. I've had 2 of those very big occasions. That's really difficult to deal with because you don't know when it's going to occur. And in both instances, it dragged on for days, and you never knew what race, what day. The anticipation was building. There were requests from management to insert more references to those jockeys in the race calls, and so that's just a completely different thing to approach and deal with. And I found it more draining and more difficult than a specific major race.
Did you have specific lines, like besides them requesting? Did you have specific lines you thought of to say when stuff like that's happening?
Yeah, I turned a couple of things over in my mind, and I was able to use, of course, sometimes in a close finish, you might not have the opportunity, but it was apparent that Pinkai was going to win at least a 16th of a mile from home. And I said, whatever it was that I said, I'd kind of turned it over in my head and thought this might sound all right. It was basically just, history at Hollywood Park, as Lafitte Pincay. Again, I don't even remember. I tell you what was kind of surreal, though, is that I attended the final day of racing ever at Hollywood Park. I just wanted to be there because the place was so significant and life-changing for me. That was in 2013. And across that day, they replayed between races over the public address a countdown of the top 10 most historic, memorable races, the most important historical races in the history of Hollywood Park. And all of a sudden, when they got to number 4, there I was hearing myself calling Pincay, and that's how highly rated that particular event was. And it was, again, to use the phrase pinch yourself, it was another one of those moments. It was kind of surreal standing around there on the track's last ever day, hearing me from those years ago.
Have you had favorite horses that you've gotten called multiple times that you liked watching and calling?
Yes, you develop a certain affinity, a fondness for horses, particularly ones that race with some regularity. I was such a big fan of Cigar. I only got to call him once, but he was probably my favorite American horse of all time, simply by virtue of how many different tracks he went to. They took him everywhere. And so he was a real crowd pleaser nationwide and even internationally in Dubai. And so I reveled in the chance to call that historic win by Cigar. It's still maybe my favorite of all time. Arlington was nuts on that afternoon. It was a massive crowd, and it was pre-TVG. The race was televised live on CBS nationally, and so it got a lot of attention at that moment, and I was very excited to be a part of it. There's lots of lesser horses, though, that go around and I just take a liking to because they might be particularly gritty or game, really honest performers over a period of several seasons, rather than the now you see them, now you don't champions that are kind of wrapped in cotton candy.
How much more challenging it is to call the quarter horse races than the thoroughbred, and how challenging it is to call both the same day that you do.
Yeah, the quarter horse racing is a really nice, fresh challenge for me. I had a taste of it a couple of tracks previously. I had worked at Lone Star Park in Texas for 5 seasons at the beginning of the 2000s, and they would have a thoroughbred meeting in the spring and a fall meet dedicated to quarter horse racing. So I did 5 of those quarter horse meets and 1 or 2 other tracks, including the county fairs that I've done, incorporated quarter horse racing to some degree. But to actually have that as my full-time job now has been a challenge, but I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I find it quite invigorating. The finishes can be wild, and you're on your toes all night because it's one thing to have thoroughbred photo finishes where the horses are typically very close to each other, but these quarter horse finishes, they can be very wide apart. And so that's challenging. It's vocally and mentally draining to do the double headers, but it gives me a chance to do some afternoon thoroughbred work and to be a part of the Southern California thoroughbred circuit. So I relish those opportunities as well. I just keep a pretty low profile socially during those few weeks.
Your trademark when the gates open is just to say racing. Where did that come from, and how did that come about?
You know, it's one of many ways that I used to begin a race call in Australia. If you listen to any race caller from down under, you'll hear them say whatever, a variation, a variety of different ways. Nobody thinks about it or cares about it in Australia. And it was after I'd arrived at Hollywood Park that it became apparent to me that it's actually a way in which the fans relate to announcers, that this is a real signature of American race callers. And for a few weeks at Hollywood, I was continuing to say a variety of things. And it was pointed out to me that I should settle on one, adopt it, stick with it, and make it mine. And so basically there were some people telling me that racing stood out to them as something that nobody else was saying. They liked the sound of it. And it's short and sharp. And so I stuck with racing. it's just one of a dozen ways that I would have started a race call in Australia without thinking about it twice.
How do we get horse racing a little bit more popular here like it is in Australia? Because I look at the coverage over in Australia too. It's a total different world. And as a matter of fact, I actually like watching their coverage a lot more just because it is so in-depth.
It's in-depth and it's transparent. I certainly wish that the US had greater transparency in the way that races are reported on and reviewed. There are a lot more interviews pre-race and post-race in Australia. And the stewards are very quick to come forward with explanations of poor performances by horses, well-fancied horses. They'll interview the trainer and jockey. All of this gets broadcast to the public. It gets released in stewards' minutes or stewards' written reports at the end of every race day. It's automatically public. So I wish that there were more of that here in the US rather than just being left guessing what might have happened. And even when the horse comes back to run next time, you're still in the dark and you're just assuming something went wrong, but nobody knows. How come we don't know? People deliberate on social media in particular over whether or not a DQ was the right decision. There's a lot of back and forth that gets everybody riled up and everyone's got an opinion, and that's fair enough. But I wish there were more discussion about why a certain horse performed the way he or she did. And that just seems to get forgotten about in an instant and nobody worries about it or cares. So I think transparency is a big thing. And the other thing for me is fixed odds. I think the country needs it desperately. The US is a technological leader of the world in just about every respect, except when it comes to horse racing. Don't get me started on how long it takes to get a photo finish decision to come down. But the changing of the odds is paramount. That it has to be fixed. Clearly, it won't be fixed and can't be fixed. So let's get some fixed odds wagering. I'll tell you, after the Golden Gate Fields races one time, I was at a bar in Berkeley and got talking to a group of college students. And I had them enthralled as I told them how you can actually play the horses with an edge if you're disciplined enough to not bet every race and just wait for an overlay, that you can't get an overlay at the casino. And that the whole concept of it really had them drawn in. But then afterwards I was thinking, how's that really going to play out for them if they come to the track and then their odds that they thought they were getting actually disappear after the start of the race? So I think there's a lot of potential to appeal to young people along those lines of value in wagering versus casinos who always have the house edge, if we can know what odds we're actually securing. I used to bet in Australia in the 80s. I used to make my own odds and bet accordingly when I could get, you can go shopping, bookmakers, fixed odds, or you can bet the tote if you prefer. There's always choices and options. And that's what's lacking here, I think.
I agree with you on the, for me, I think NYRA does it the best because they have the 3 minutes before post. All the rebate houses aren't allowed to bet anymore. So there's nothing worse than, it's late night, you're looking at Mountaineer, you're looking at Charlestown, you're betting, and the horse leaves the gate at 2-1. And by the time he gets around the second turn, 40 seconds later, he's down to, 2-5. And to me, I agree with you. That's absolutely, and there's no way in 2022 you can't convince me that they can't calculate that in 40 seconds.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. It's so technologically backward and asinine, and it should be a national embarrassment.
It is.
Certainly the rest of the world's tote systems, even in 1980, whatever, in Australia, if I had a bet on the tote, it was instantaneous. The odds changed straight away. Nothing changes after the start of a race. It's been like that for decades in Australia, but not here. So it's a real shame because I'll never forget the intrigue that I was able to generate with that group of Berkeley College students, just the idea, the concept of being able to bet an overlay if you think that your opinion is worth supporting against the majority of the public's.
What's crazy about the Australia photo is when I play Australia and they do the photo so quick, I'm actually like, can you look at that again? How did you get that so quick?
Yeah.
You know, because you're used to it over here. Another thing, can we talk a little bit about the Santa Anita experience? You got hired over Frank Miramati and then things quickly changed.
Yeah, well, they quickly changed. I guess that's one way to put it. The revolving door of chief executives turned yet again, but typically that revolving door, for which Santa Anita has been quite infamous for many decades, has never had an impact on the person occupying the announcer's booth. But this particular chief executive who waltzed into the place apparently was ignorant of the process, the audition process of just 2 or 3 years earlier, that had dragged on for 3 months or so and was really very stressful for me and for the other people involved. It was an unprecedented way to approach the hiring of an announcer, but we all went through it and I was hired. I was offered the job. This gentleman apparently also didn't appreciate Santa Anita's tradition, its history of having so few announcers. The length of the tenure of the people who had preceded me was always very lengthy. They'd only had a handful of announcers in their history. That apparently was lost on this person, who was also tone deaf, because, and I'll say this, and I really don't enjoy or feel comfortable tooting my own horn. I'll say it with the understanding by everybody that I am absolutely my own biggest critic. I'm a perfectionist and I give myself a hell of a hard time. But I do know that my work was well received across the board, from the high rollers in the Eddie Logan suite through the press box, fan feedback. Across the board, it was well received. And so to have all of that hard work through the audition process blow up in smoke is really unconscionable, and it was a devastating blow. I guess this person was also somewhat malleable, as well as tone deaf and ignorant, because there's one particular person who wields a little too much influence and power, who was able to tug his coattails and had brought some influence to bear on the decision as well. So it all just fell apart for me, and I had the rug pulled from under my feet. It's not something that I'm embarrassed about at all. And I am still on good terms with some people who remain in management there, and they told me that they were blindsided, that they had no idea this was coming. And I believe them, I like them, and I still do. And I still want Santa Anita to succeed, because the horse racing industry needs every track to succeed. So I don't have any malice against the racetrack or the people who are left there. But it was a very, very bitter, tough pill for me to swallow, and for my wife. It derailed our lives and caused a lot of hardship and mental anguish.
So what is going on with California racing? Why do they have such a hard time filling out the fields?
Well, the foal crop is plummeting, and that's very scary. The trend has been obvious and visible for quite a few years. I don't know how that gets turned around, but it's just a shrinking, compressing schedule of races, and it's difficult to be optimistic. And it pains me to say this, but for the first time, if I were approached by a young person aspiring to be a race caller, and I have lent a helping hand and great encouragement to several people over the years, and I've been only too happy to do it, just paying forward what I received in my formative years in Australia. but I just would have a hard time really telling somebody that this is a career worth pursuing at this time in this country. And that really saddens me greatly.
Well, we do see like the handles are up, the people are betting is up. I feel like states like Kentucky seem to be doing things differently than states like California or states like, other state like my state, Illinois, where they're just everything's getting shoot out of here. But in any case, one thing you got to call these great races, but what I have to say, was the Seinfeld call your favorite?
Kaepernick. Yeah, that really was an amazing thing that cropped up at the end of 1991 when I was contacted at the Hollywood Park booth by the Seinfeld producers who wanted me to come in and voice a race call for this episode called The Subway, where Kramer overhears a tip while he's riding the subway, goes to bet the horse, and so I did the race call for them, and it's amazing that it's still in so regular reruns. I got to meet him, and I actually did the race call on the OTB set in a Burbank studio, even though Seinfeld was set in New York. It was largely filmed in California. So I was in a Burbank studio with a microphone dangling overhead, calling this race with this Kaepernick horse, and actually was asked to do it again because at first I had him making ground too gradually, and that wasn't exciting enough for the Hollywood sort of mentality. They wanted the horse to just come from the clouds, and the race call ended up being used and is part of Seinfeld folklore. It's a pretty popular episode, at least among racing fans, and really nice to be a part of it.
Yes, you're in one of those space capsules now that they send off into outer space, right? From the Seinfeld episode.
Yeah,
So,
I've been lucky to have a few opportunities that were just one-off, random things that cropped up. Like I got to call a Preakness Stakes on the National Radio Network when Tom Durkin needed to take the day off, and I was called in to do that at Pimlico. It was 2000 when Red Bullet upset Fusaichi Pegasus, and at that time Dave Johnson was on the television network coverage of the Triple Crown races, and Tom was doing a national radio network. So I got to call a Triple Crown race out of the blue, and a race in Argentina. Went all that way to call one race for HRTV, the biggest race in South America, and again that was just a one-off thing, and Seinfeld would fall into that category, I guess.
mm-hmm. So when you hear yourself on Seinfeld and when you went back to Hollywood Park on the last day and you hear your voice, how weird is that?
Very. It's really amazing, actually, to think of how many different tracks and opportunities I've had. And I've closed a few tracks down, The Santa Anita incident was not the first time I've had the rug pulled from under my feet, but mostly it's been through tracks closing. I was starting to wonder if I might be the kiss of death. Arlington, for example, I had 2 wonderful years there, including Cigar's race in 96. And in the late 1990s, Mr. Duchessois shut the place down for 2 years in protest against a riverboat casino. Mate, this is a live telecast. My cat is throwing up on the carpet about 6 feet behind the camera here. She's been ill of late, and that's a rather unfortunate little interjection by Bindi the cat. But anyway.
Social distancing from a cat in a different way.
Yeah. Poor Bindi. She just hasn't been traveling too well in the last week or two. But yeah, the closure of Arlington was a dreadful setback. I loved the place and was actually offered the chance to return when they resumed racing, but was otherwise occupied at the time. There have been a few tracks that have closed, and I've just been hung out to dry. So employment's been a bit sporadic over the years. I wish that I had the opportunity to carve a niche for myself, more of an identity, as some of the race callers have been able to do, working decades at the one place. But it just wasn't in the cards for me. And I certainly presumed Santa Anita would be my last job and wanted it to be, but it wasn't. And so all you can do is pick yourself up and dust yourself off again. And I'm so grateful for the people at Los Alamitos, Ed Allred and Kathy Mongi, who have embraced and welcomed me. It's a great environment. There's no corporate layers above them. You know where you stand. It's a terrific, welcoming place to work. And I like the routine of the year-round work also, because it's been so sporadic for me at times. So I'm loving where I'm at. It's a good spot. It's a fresh challenge that I'm relishing, and all is well right now.
Then you have Saturday and Sunday night all to yourself, and everything else is shut down. So, did you ever get offered anything out of New York? JW wants to know: were you ever offered anything from NYRA?
No, I've never been approached by NYRA. I've never had. Matter of fact, that Preakness would be the only call I've ever made on the East Coast. I've done a lot of work in the Midwest, Retama Park, as well as Lone Star. I actually called the first ever season at Retama in '95, and they closed. They declared bankruptcy at the end of their first year. But that was another job I lost through no fault of my own. And obviously I've done the Bay Area tracks and a little stint at Turf Paradise at the time that they were owned by Hollywood Park. And so, yeah, and Fairgrounds. I had 3 winters in New Orleans, which is still a favorite place for my wife and me to visit. We were there, in fact, as recently as mid-June for her birthday. We love getting back to New Orleans, love the vibe, the music, the food, although working 3 seasons there did not treat my cholesterol levels too well.
I don't have to work there for my cholesterol levels not to be too good. But anyway, it's a whole nother story.
Do you have any hard names that are harder that you have a little bit more trouble announcing, whether it's horses or jockeys or trainers?
Yeah, every night. And, you know, the quarter horse names are tricky. There's a lot of very similar names, and that's a challenge. But going back over the years, there have been some absolute nightmares, and every race caller would have encountered them. I'll give you one example from the Bay Area in the 90s. There was a horse, Matt Chu used to train, whose sire was Bulger and dam was I'm Coasting. And the creative, imaginative, inventive owners decided they would just spell the entire breeding backwards. So the horse's name was Gnitsoak My Reglob. Was a front runner in mile and a 16th races, so you couldn't bury it back in the field and hope it made no impact. It always got plenty of mentions. So that's one I'll never forget. There have been many others.
If you pronounce them the wrong way, it can have a completely different meaning.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty where you've got to be careful from that standpoint as well. You have to tread very carefully and enunciate very, very precisely.
Yes, indeed.
Well, you've had a lot of practice on that name, so you mastered it right there. You had it down. If they told you right now, like, you couldn't be an announcer, would you do any other jobs in horse racing?
I've always liked writing. I haven't had much of an opportunity to do it, but I have over the last few years done some freelance articles for Sky Racing World, which promotes and distributes the Australian racing signal in North America. And during the periods of the biggest racing in Australia, typically the autumn and the spring, they have me do some articles for them, which I really enjoy. And I would like the opportunity to do more of that type of thing. Think I could make a bit of a fist of writing. I love words. And so that would be the other thing that interests me the most.
Do you want to get paid to do it, or are you willing to do it for free?
Well, that might depend on whether I'm still getting paid to call races. Not sure.
Oh, well, I ask. Hey, they say if you don't ask, you don't know, right? Because if you ever want to write an article, we have horseracingtoday.net. Just send it to us, man. We'll post it for sure. Unfortunately, we just don't have the means to pay anybody right now. That's why I ask. So it's a selfish question, I have to admit.
Well, we'll have a chat about it down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. If we do a thing, my friend, another guy on the show, Tom and I, we do what we call Foreign Fridays, where we go across the planet, where we do races in Australia, we do them in Hong Kong, we've done them in England and Ireland. So on Fridays, we focus on stuff elsewhere, with the idea that some of these horses are going to end up over here for something like the Breeders' Cup. So, if there's any international story that you think you want to write about and you want to get it published somewhere, just let us know. 100% guaranteed it'll be published. Won't get paid, but you get published.
Good on you, mate.
All righty. Anyway, so I was going to bring that up. Say, if you ever lose another job, you always can come work for us. In any case, that's about it for me, Shawn. Any other questions before we let Michael get back to Bindy's mess?
Well, I'll end on this. Do you visit Australia regularly?
I used to, until they pretty much shut the country down and didn't even let dual citizens in. It's been a difficult thing for me to deal with, actually. I've lived in the US for 32 years and got dual citizenship about probably 2005 or 2006. Very proudly so, a dual citizen. And I always went back for a visit for a month or so every 2 to 3 years. Right now, I'm at about 3.25 years. And I'm just at the point where it's looking like it might be possible to go down there again, and I'll look into it. Ed Burgart typically took some time off in March, April, when the stakes schedule was a little quieter at Los Alamitos. And I imagine I would follow suit and look at that time. So maybe in the first half of next year, but that'll make it 4 years, and that makes me uncomfortable. I had never felt so isolated as I did in those first couple of years of this pandemic. But hopefully I can get down there March, April of next year.
One final question from JW. What announcers do you listen to for a race call?
Well, I listen to race callers who are announcing pretty much wherever I'm interested in a race. I've always been a big fan of, and I hesitate to name people because there's a lot of announcers I respect. But I've been in the booth with Kurt Becker, and his powers of memorization and retention are fantastic. He called Arlington in the 1990s briefly for a couple of seasons, and then he left horse racing for NASCAR for a while, and before he came back to it. But he used to call faster at Arlington than he does now at Keeneland, where it's a little bit more deliberate and precise. But I formed the impression, listening to him and watching him in the booth at Arlington in the 90s, that he would absolutely make it in Australia if he ever had the opportunity or desire. So I just admire his skill and talent and intrinsic ability. But there's lots of other announcers. I just don't want to go into some sort of laundry list for fear of leaving somebody out. But there's certainly
getting hammered on Twitter, right?
A depth of talent here for sure. And anybody who's sticking with it and making a fist of it in this era of racing, being in the perilous position of losing racetracks and losing dates, has my respect.
Well, we certainly have. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I have one more question now that you brought that up. I saw the other day an announcer actually said the smaller fields give them more trouble than the larger fields. Is that true in your case?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, there's nothing more difficult or challenging than calling 3 or 4 or 5 horses in a long race. Particularly, I'll say for me, perhaps more than some other race callers, because I thrive on variation. I just hate repetition and predictability, and I'm always looking for ways to keep it fresh and interesting and a different turn of phrase here and there, and it becomes difficult to produce that if you get a succession of small fields over long distances. And sometimes I'll end up with some sort of stupid thing that comes out of my mouth because I'm trying too hard to think of how else I might say something. So I much prefer getting my teeth into a bigger field. The 12 horse capacity of most tracks here, 14 at Lone Star when I was there, is a far more enjoyable challenge for me. And of course, in Australia, I've called races fields up to 19. The Argentina race I called about a decade ago was a field of 23, I think, 22 or 23. So that's extreme. I don't need 20 on a regular basis, but I would absolutely prefer more than 4 or 5. Something in the 8 to 10 range is nice middle ground, a good number to work with, where you're focused and locked in and you're doing a job and there's still an opportunity to maybe embellish it at times. I like to be colourful, but I don't want to be branded a comedian. I don't want to be jeopardizing accuracy just for the sake of colour. Although I'll tell you one thing that really surprised me in calling a quarter horse race this past weekend at Los Alamitos. A horse veered very wide, came down the outside rail pretty much and won. And somehow in a quarter horse race, I still had time to say that he looked like he snatched a hot dog out of a patron's hand. Now, that's not something I ever imagined I'd have time for in a quarter horse race. So it came as a pleasant surprise when it was just tumbling out of my mouth spontaneously. And so even in the quarter horse races, sometimes you can still find a couple of seconds for having a little bit of fun.
Well, it's certainly been a lot of fun.
Entertain as well as inform.
Well, it certainly was entertaining and a lot of fun tonight having you. We appreciate it, and we look forward to those articles coming in.
We'll talk more about it. Thanks so much, fellas. Really enjoyed the chat. Thanks for your interest.
We as well. Have a great evening.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night. And there we have it, the big head Shawn back. That was the fastest 43 minutes I can remember in a while.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, show never disappoints, right? Or the guest never disappoints. That's for sure.
We never do
the guest and the host. The guest and the host never disappoint. Sometimes, I might disappoint. But.
Yeah. No, all their guests have to feel after they leave here, they got to go take some Advil because their backs hurt from lifting up the show, so to speak, carrying the show. A+
in effort though with the articles. We'll see what comes of
that. I was in sales at one point, so you got to always ask, right? I mean, you don't ask questions, you don't get answers. That's the way that goes. And speaking of not getting answers, Shawn, we sent you a little article about that. There was a opinion piece, it looks like, in Pollock Report. And they says in the early stages of its existence, HISA fails transparency test. And in this article, they talk about how the state board agencies have been more transparent prior to HISA than HISA has been since its inception. So you think this is just a matter of growing pains, Shawn? Or do you feel like maybe it's the, what is it old, they trick in sales where they false advertising? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it probably is false advertising. And, I don't know, let me show you my shocked face. I mean, who didn't see this coming, right? I mean, we weren't really getting answers before. Why would we get answers now?
Well, that was part of the whole idea, was supposed to be more transparency. Like Michael was talking about, when Tom and I do these Foreign Fridays, when you get like the reports from down under at the Australian tracks and even in the English tracks, they actually have stewards notes. Like if a horse, for example, has a bad trip, they'll pull the jockey in and they'll ask the jockey, what was up with this? The jockey will say, well, the horse just didn't have it today, or I felt like if I did this, he didn't react. So the jockey will have to explain why the horse didn't perform correctly, right? And then like if the horse trains and it swims, or the horse gets a shot, or it's visited the vet, or it got scratched, they tell you why. So there is a lot more transparency in the international racing than there is in the American racing. And I agree with Tom. I agree with Michael. I feel like all that information should be available to the bettor. It shouldn't be behind the scenes. It should be out in the front. And I think maybe that might actually help folks. And and I've always complained about that stuff with those odds. I say it might not be crooked, but it sure as hell looks crooked when a horse leaves the gate at 2-1 and ends up at the finish line at 2-5. That's just not right.
Yeah. I completely understand it. I knew he was going there, and everybody goes there. I don't know why it is the way it is and why it's not fixed. The transparency thing, though, too. I mean, it's so messed up here. We have a jockey look over his shoulder 3 times, get completely wide, yada, yada, yada. They meet with him, and did we ever get an explanation on what the jockey said? We never got anything.
But we should get it. I mean, that should be available to the public. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why shouldn't we know, right?
Yeah, I mean, okay, if he's not going to get punished, that's fine. But please tell me what he sold to you, and now you're going to try to sell to us because something obviously happened.
Sean. I'm just kidding.
I'm just something happened. What was it?
Mm-hmm. Well, they say walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, must be a duck, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, in California now, man, they're going license crazy. If you're in the media, you need a license to go to the backstretch access. What do you think of this? This is not going to send a whole lot of folks out to California to get more publicity for horse racing in a positive way. I mean, sometimes I really wonder what these people are thinking. Make it more difficult to introduce people to horse racing. That's idea number one. That's just why politicians.
Yeah, this kind of stuff I don't like reading or seeing because you want to show everybody that kind of stuff. So why have to go through all that to even just do it once? Like, I don't understand.
Just make it. I think they should make more access, not less access.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And more access, more transparency, and then cut out the odds at 3-1. So I know a lot of folks 3 minutes to post. I know a lot of folks that bet sports that won't bet horse racing because they don't understand how mutual pools work. And you explain to them, look, you take the favorite in baseball, like tonight, for example, the picks with the professor. You can find a link to that in our descriptions on the YouTube shows over on Twitter and Facebook. But for example, he's taken the Guardians as his pick tonight, the picks with the professor. They're minus 183. You rarely get a horse that goes off as the favorite at minus 183, which would probably be the equivalent of there are 2 to 5 odds, but you have other options in there too.
Right. Yeah. You can play whatever you want to play. And you can make your own, you can do the exact they're trying. It's not that I pay 2 to 5, but you need the 2 to 5 to win. So yeah, you can play as you please in horse racing, which, a lot better.
So this weekend, as you don't know already, Shawn and I and Terry and Tom are going to be at Saratoga. Shawn will make his presence felt on Saturday. He's like the star. When he comes in at the end, fashionably late, red carpet, that'll be Shawn. But Terry and Tom will be there Thursday. They're going to have lunch with a winner who guessed the Chicago Cubs. August 8th was the first night game. So Thursday, they'll be there. Friday, I'll show up. Saturday, Shawn will show up. I think there'll at least be 2 or 3 of us there on Sunday as well. But you know who else is going to be there, Shawn?
Who else?
Budweiser Clydesdales.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
They're going to be there because we're there, Shawn.
I actually seen them at Penn National one time. It was really cool. And they were another one. This kind of stuff should be done more often, brought in a lot of kids, a lot of pictures, making memories, which we always say about at the track. So,
Well, they'll be there tomorrow, August the 10th. So if you're at Saratoga tomorrow, make sure you bring your camera along so you can get a picture of the Budweiser Clydesdales. Then on Thursday, bring your camera along so you can get a picture of Terry and Tom. And then on Friday, if you're there again, take your camera so you get a picture of Terry, Tom, myself, and the Clydesdales. And then on Sunday, who needs the Clydesdales, Terry or Tom or myself, because you could take a picture with Shawn.
There you go.
All right, so make sure you check that out. And finally, I guess we upbeat show, so it kind of ended on a sad note. You read about this jockey in New Zealand, Taiki Yanagida. I hope I pronounced that right. Died, and it was so when you put in Google News, horse racing news, it pops up like the first 10 stories. Apparently, the young man fell off the horse ran over him, or fell on him, and the following horse behind him stepped on his back. And rest in peace. Just a reminder how dangerous the sport really can be.
Yeah, and it seems to go in spells too. A couple months ago, it was, I don't know if it was Australia, it was overseas, where a lot of young female jockeys were getting seriously hurt. They all seemed to survive, but it was just like one after another every couple days. It's weird how it goes in the streaks too when it really happens. And then there's moments where it doesn't happen all that much and you kind of forget about it, and then it hits you again.
Just a reminder how dangerous the sport really is, and how much these folks that get on the back of the horses they go through. And it's like riding a motorcycle. There's probably not a single jockey that hasn't had a spill, right? Not one.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's galloping in the morning or racing on the track, and certainly we all hold our breath when anything goes wrong. And in this case, for Tiger, as he was known, we certainly pray for he and his family that they can find peace through all.
Absolutely.
All right, Shawn. Well, that takes us wire to wire for this Tuesday. Tomorrow I'll be back at Saratoga. Going to try to end my cold streak, man. I've not hit a pick 4. I've gotten to the last leg a couple of times, only to be beaten. So maybe tomorrow I can settle that. Be the last time I'm on until probably next Monday or Tuesday. I'm not quite sure. Are you going to do anything on Thursday?
I don't think so.
All right. So I know that Eddie C, and Chris P will be back on Saturday for spot plays. I may or may not be back here on Monday. I know Shawn and Jamie will be back Monday night for Horse Center. Who is our guest tomorrow night?
Tomorrow it's Mario Pino, 7,001 career wins. He actually he got career wins number 7,000 and said he was going to retire, and got one more win after that, and went off in the sunset. Got to retire on top.
He wanted to end on 7,000 and got 7,000. What is that round number? And then who do you have on tap for next week with Jamie?
I'm not prepared for that, but
okay,
also what I'll say.
I screwed you
up. I'll get it. I'll also say you said about a winner for Thursday. There's another one available that I did put on Twitter. People had to like and retweet and stuff. So if you want to do that real quick, check it out on Twitter. I will announce.
I don't even know what it is. Tell me.
All you got to do is like and retweet that tweet to qualify, and then I'll pick it out of my hat.
For what?
Ticket, lunch and admission at Saratoga. Tom told me there was another ticket for Thursday.
Oh, for 2 for Thursday. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
See, I don't even know. I don't know what's going on around here. I missed last week. They're talking about horse testicles. Then they're running contests. My God.
So next week with Jamie, we got Monday, Casey DeColat. She's done a lot of different things in the business. Tuesday, Antonio Garardo, jockey. And then Wednesday, photographer Kelly Sorrows. And she also does some other stuff in the business as well. But she shoots for Cody Photography right now. She's at Indiana Grand. And her husband also, or boyfriend, rides there as well.
So that should be a fun show. Yeah. That's a different perspective than we've had before, right? So make sure you tune in for that. And you want to learn all about how you can use those photos. Believe me.
And I hear she's a real firecracker too. So pray for me Wednesday, because I will have Jamie and Keely Sorrows. So I might be in trouble Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll just abuse Shawn on Wednesday.
And actually, I might not even be needed Wednesday. We'd just leave them to take over the show.
Yes, indeed. You probably should. They probably do anyway, Shawn, right? Anyhow.
Yeah.
That wraps it up for today. Again, I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully, if you are tomorrow at Finger Lakes, you have an opportunity to get together with Tom and Terry. They'll be over there as well. Make sure you stop in and say hi. They had an opportunity to say hello to Willie Martinez today. Thank you, Willie, for spending a couple of minutes to come over and say hi to Terry and Tom. We certainly appreciate all of the support that you and Jamie have given us. We are grateful for that and highly appreciative. That's it for today, Shawn. No matter what we're doing today. Oh, one other thing. If you like what you saw today, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our Swiss Army. Shawn right there will keep you informed, asks all kinds of fun questions. And then on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, the bell, so you're notified when we go live. Want to say thank you to Robert Bryan, Steve Goodrich, Mary Harry, William Zayonce. God, my eyes are bad. And Terry T.D. Houghton for the love on Facebook. If you agree with them, thumbs up. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube helps us with their algorithms. And you got something to say, Shawn? I can see it.
Yeah. We should have started this. We should have put a Terry and Tom tracker on this week for social media on where they were going to be on the map. You know what I mean? So we'll work on that next time. Yeah, we'll work on that next time where Tom and Terry will be.
Like Where's Waldo? But maybe we'll do like Where's Christmas, and you ran into them, then you're going to have to get the Christmas presents from them.
That way Rich knows where they're at too, because every time he's like, you get it every time, but you're like, where are we tomorrow?
Yes, the brain doesn't always work like it used to, Shawn. All right, everybody. Once again, we greatly appreciate you joining us this evening. We know you have 1,000,001 options. We're thankful that you join us, and very thankful for all of you who have subscribed to our channels. Watch us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Head on over to horseracingtoday.net. Thanks again. And we hope no matter what you do this evening or tomorrow, until we meet again, everything in your life ends up in the
winner circle.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Have a great Tuesday.